Hello again. Welcome to Steve Vision. I'm Steven Christopher Shepard. On today's show, I'll be talking about the 1970s and 1980s. My Uncle Bobby was a very instrumental part of my family when I was a boy. My grandfather Hill had a nice piece of property in South Carolina, and there was an old plantation that he bought in a place in upper South Carolina, and the old country home is still in my family, but back when my grandfather Hill was still around, we all used to meet at my grandparents' house during Christmas time especially. So I got to see my family on several occasions when I was a boy growing up in the South. I was born in Virginia, and my father moved me to Florida when I was about 6, and I grew up in Florida and then later in South Carolina. But my grandfather Hill was a war veteran of World War II, and he was a photographer. So he had a lot of pictures of battlefields, and I remember one day I was helping my grandmother up in the attic, and they had this old attic in the house where the stairs came down from a pull rope, and they were like folding stairs up in the ceiling, and so boys could do it easily. And so when I was a boy, my grandmother Hill asked me to get up in the attic and get a few things for her. And so I got up in the attic for the first time and started looking around like boys usually do. And I found this big old box of crazy war pictures. I mean, we're talking about people, blown up, heads around, body pieces. The coolest pictures of a battlefield you ever seen. And they were the pictures that my grandfather Hill had in a big old box of them. And so I'm sitting there looking at these pictures just in amazement. I loved them. And my grandmother Hill, she hollered at me, "Now get those boxes and come on down from there, Stephen." And so I didn't get to splurge on those pictures when I was a boy, but I saw them. They were really cool. But back in the 1970s and 1980s, things were different in America. You had African Americans that were in psychological control over my family in the Deep South. Men like Red Fox, the comedian and actor, and men like Ray Stevens, the singer and performer. These guys had control over my Uncle Bobby, my father, my cool cousins, and myself back in the 1970s. My Uncle Bobby had this really cool Chevelle that he had mag tires on. It was my grandfather Hill's Chevelle. Back when Chevelles were brand new, he got it. And my Uncle Bobby inherited it and made it look cool, like a Chevelle do. And we get in that Chevelle and go listen to Red Fox albums. They'd all smoke a blunt back in those days, because in South Carolina there was people that had some pretty good homegrown, and it wasn't just for everyone. It was like a secret society. But we get in that Chevelle and go riding out in the country and listen to Red Fox especially. Oh God, my Uncle Bobby loved Red Fox. I mean, my Uncle Bobby was a conservative, raised around conservative Southern Baptist. My grandmother and my grandfather were very Baptist, church-going people, but my uncle smoked some reefer, and he loved Red Fox. I grew up listening to Red Fox, and we go out in the country now. I mean, these guys are, ripped, and they put that old 8-track cassette tape, the big ones that used to exist. People don't know about them anymore, but that big old 8-track in and listen to that, and Red Fox would start talking about something funny. You know how Red Fox was, if you ever heard of it. The TV show Sanford and Son really didn't give him the justice that he deserved. His tape was good. I remember my Uncle Bobby would hear something that would trigger his sense of humor, and he doesn't really go off like a freak off might do. But Red Fox was getting tickled about something, It was like the first time black folks were saying the word, nigger. And that was funny to Southerners. They loved it. Anytime a black man start talking about other black people, and they say that word, the N-word, a white man from the South can really visualize the character that's being, investigated. And it's funny. It's a divine comedy, especially when black folks start talking about other black folks like they do. It's like the first time these comedians from the African American community came up to the surface and started talking like this. And my Uncle Bobby and my father and my cousins and myself would be in that Chevelle. And, I wasn't smoking reefer. I was just smelling of it. And Red Fox would say something hysterically funny, and my uncle would just go into a freak off, And my father, he never really laughed much, but surely he would laugh about it from time to time. And so what people don't realize is back in those days, America was doing good. It was 1970s, 1980s, before the Beastie Boys and Run DMC divided the industry. Everything was cool. Like I said, Red Fox and a lot of cool African Americans. I mean, you could almost understand why some people liked the South better, because they had good relationships with African Americans, because they're not bad people when they're in good control. And back in 1970s and 80s, the South was still kind of cool. I enjoyed South Carolina, especially. It was funny as hell back in those days. I mean, the way people were conservative on one side and then smoke reefer and listening to Red Fox on the other. It's like these Confederates in my family weren't the ones that were pulling the triggers. They were the ones, that survive all this, and they love funny stuff from African Americans. And so, over the course of my life in the South, other comedians started coming up and infecting, like my Aunt Carla and others, Ray Stevens especially. Right around 1974, he came out with The Streak, and The Streak was a cool song. Now, I mean, if you don't know The Streak from 1970, you didn't know anything, because that song was popular. I mean, everybody knew about The Streak. And so The Streak got big with my Uncle Bobby. I mean, he liked comedy. He could laugh, but he just wasn't an avid consumer of it, but he knew the good stuff. And so The Streak came along, and then my Aunt Carla got the album and started playing it for my sisters and I. And my Aunt Carla, she had some other cool albums, like her Monster Songs albums, and that was a cool album that scared my little sisters to death at times, because it was like one of those albums that were like, ooh, and my little sister and my Aunt Carla would play Monster sometimes, and it scared the death out of her. But The Streak, now, that song encouraged my Aunt Deborah and my Uncle Bobby, who were young people at one time, and I love my Aunt Deborah. She was fun and pretty. My Uncle Bobby loved her. My Aunt Deborah passed away this year, God bless her. But back in the 1970s, when the Streak song was big, my Uncle Bobby especially, he loved it. So I started streaking. And my grandparents' house in Hickory Tavern is an old house, and it's a big one. It's like, I don't know how many rooms it is, 4, but it has this big cathedral ceiling, hallway, and the house is pretty comfortable at one time. And the main bathroom is built such that you could leave one door out one side, circle around the living room, and come in the other door, and shut the door and lock yourself in. So I start streaking from the bathtub. I was completely naked, and I would run out the bathroom door on one side, circle around, run through the living room, streak my Uncle Bobby and Aunt Deborah, and come back into the bathroom, lock the doors before they could get me. And that was a streak. And the first time I started streaking my Uncle Bobby and Aunt Deborah, they laughed, boy. I mean, my Aunt Deborah laughed at my little dick, because that's the first thing most girls look at is your little dick. And one day, though, I had streaked for a while. My grandmother Hill and my grandfather Hill loved to streak, and they started in on being my agent. They would have like the Ridgeway family, Curtis and his wife, come over at times, and they knew of the streak, and I'd streak them, and oh boy, old folks just got tickled at a good streak. I mean, oh my God. And my grandmother Hill, she started promising me things if I would streak for her, because other people in my family, the Kerns, oh God, the Woods family, my Uncle Dennis and Renee, the Hill family, I mean, there's a lot of them, the Tinsley family. Oh God, I have a lot of cousins in South Carolina, and they visited my grandmother Hill, my grandfather Hill, a lot back in those days, and they all got streaked. I mean, I was a very popular part of my family because of the streak. And one day, my Uncle Bobby and my Aunt Deborah were there again, and it was a beautiful evening for a good streak. And I was going to surprise them because I hadn't seen them in a while. I might have been like a year older. And this is at the conclusion of the streak now. And I was taking a bath, and I got out of the bathtub, dried off, went out the side door of the bathroom, and streaked around the living room. And my Uncle Bobby knew I was coming, and he grabbed me for the first time too. He caught the streak, and oh my, he took me over by my Aunt Deborah, and the first thing my Aunt Deborah does is start giggling at my little dick, because that's what most of them look at. And back when you're like 10 years old, your dick from a bathtub, if it's not all a good hard, I mean, a boy's dick is about as big as a peanut. And so my Aunt Deborah got tickled because she looked at my dick for the first time and saw that little peanut and plum, boy's hole between their legs. And that embarrassed me so bad at the time that I never streaked again. No, sir. And my Uncle Bobby now, he was a character. He ruled the family good. My grandfather Hill was the patriarch in my family, a war veteran, and there was other veterans of war on his side of the family, and they're all up on the Veterans Memorial in Ware Shoals, South Carolina, still. But the one cool thing that my Uncle Bobby did for me that sticks out in my head is he took me camping up along the Chattooga River. And this is right around the time that Deliverance was made. And I remember it in my head because my Uncle Bobby is like my hero. I trust him with my peanut dick. And I was a streak with him, he embarrassed me bad with Deborah. But he took me camping a lot, and we go hiking up in the mountains and do some nice summits when I was a boy and have hot dogs up on the top of mountains. He was cool, man. My Uncle Bobby's still around too. He's just getting old. But he took me camping up on the Chattooga River, right? And Deliverance was in my head still. I remember, it's like being paranoid about my own uncle. He told me, yeah, we're going up camping on the Chattooga River, where they filmed that cool movie. And I remember Deliverance, and I'm like, yeah, I remember Deliverance. Isn't it that movie where them boys butt fucked them in? They were canoeing down that river. He's like, yeah, wasn't that cool though? And so we went camping up on the Chattooga, walked into the woods deep and everything, right on the river. And the whole time, I'm thinking, oh, my Uncle Bobby, boy, I hope this ain't what I think it is. And I love my Uncle Bobby. He never touched me one time. We slept in the same tent that night. I remember this. And it's funny when you're in the mountains along the river, on the Chattooga River, We had this crazy stew that he made that night, and we ate that stew, and he probably smoked a spliff or a blunt, and we went to bed. And like I told you, I was like thinking to myself, oh my Uncle Bobby is real crazy. And but we slept through the night, and during the night you hear all kinds of animals walking around your tent. And we woke up the next morning, and that stew had bugs all in it from inside the tent or somewhere, and we put that stew back on the fire, and lit it up, warmed it up. And my Uncle Bobby, he ain't never ate a bug or a shrimp or oyster, nothing. But up on the Chattooga that morning, with no more food or anything else, he stirred them bugs into that stew that morning. And I remember that. And we sat there and ate that stew with bugs in it. And I think we laughed about that for a while, hiking back to the car. But I absolutely love growing up with my Uncle Bobby. He also took me snipe hunting when I was a boy, and he had sold that snipe to me. And snipe are an imaginary bird that an older person or an elder can sell to boys that like to hunt. And my Uncle Bobby sold it, He's like, Steven, the snipe are running east or west right now. And I bet you if you went back down on that creek and sat there for a while, you get you one. And so he took me down into the ravine back behind the house and set me up in a potato sack. And I sat there and waited for the snipes in the cold for like an hour, waiting for that snipe to come into the bag, and I was going to get him. And my grandfather Hill, he comes walking down through the woods from the house, laughing, giggling at himself. He looked at me and says, he asked me, Stephen, you catch a snipe yet? And I'm, no, sir, I'm waiting now. He's like, Stephen, I need to tell you about your Uncle Bobby. Come on, let's go have some supper. And they told that story for most of my life about the snipe. Oh my, about the streaker. I was a celebrity child when I was a boy. And this was all legitimate, divine comedy that I grew up with. I just like to thank those people, Red Fox and Ray Stevens, my Uncle Bob, and the rest of my family. I think I had an excellent childhood, and God bless you all.